Welcome everyone to today's EJ Thriving Communities Grant Making Program information session, focusing on developing your project description. So as just a little bit of a background, we're going to move quickly through some welcome and introduction. So Cameron, we can go ahead and move to the next slide and then the one after that one. We'll stay here for just a second while we do this. My name is Christine Bevick. I'm a Deputy Director for the Thriving Communities Grant Making Program here at RTI International. If you haven't joined us for one of our previous sessions, just a little bit of background, RTI is an independent nonprofit dedicated to improving the human condition. We provide research, development, technical services to local, state, federal governments, nonprofits, and commercial clients worldwide. Our focus for this project is on Region 4. So that's a nice highlighted was highlighted on the other screen. And the grant making program itself is held and based within our Transformative Research Unit for Equity, which we affectionately call TRUE. And that division is really focused on transforming traditional research practices and mindsets to reimagine and create systems that are really focused on advancing equity and social justice. So this grant making program is really at home in this space. RTI is responsible for supporting the grant making program within Region 4, as well as the National Central, which consists of 23 states, and then also facilitating the grant making program and supporting that within Region 7. So joining me today, though, from the TCGM team is Laura Baum. She'll be helping with answering questions in the Q&A, and also from the React for EJ team, which is the Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Center. I have Katie Wardell, as well as Skylar Debris, Janelle Armstrong-Brown, and Karen Straza are also joining me today. So you've got a great team to help answer your questions as we move forward. This is the third in a 4-part series. So these are intended for the competitive tier grants. If you have questions about the non-competitive program or the application there in those sections, that one is actually going to be being posted to YouTube probably either this week or early next week. So take a moment. We will drop the link in there for the YouTube page so you can subscribe there. They're also going to be posted to the website, but if you subscribe, you'll get those notifications when those recordings become available immediately. So with this, after this, we've got one more session scheduled for next week on focusing on budget, which I know everyone is also really excited about. So if you've got budget questions, there are going to be other opportunities also to address those. So today's really going to focus on developing your project. Let's go to the next slide. So today for our objectives, the whole part of this series is to help you feel comfortable with completing your application. And today, again, it's focusing on the project information section of your application. So by the end of all this, hopefully you'll be able to be comfortable identifying the project information that you need for the application and making sure that you've selected the correct funding tier for your project. Also around there, that question about which funding tier to apply for has come up repeatedly in the past month, especially about concept designs, construction plans, construction building. So we're going to touch a little bit on those. And hopefully by the end of all of this, you're going to have a little bit of a better sense about those different funding tiers and the types of activities and outcomes that are going to be associated with each. So our agenda real quick, just moving ahead to take a peek at that. I'm going to provide a brief overview about the program. So if you haven't been with us before, we're just going to highlight some of the backgrounds on the program information for this. And then we're going to dig into the actual project related questions in the applications and review those different types. We're also going to be sharing some tips about completing that section there. And then as always, we're going to reserve some time at the end for questions. So in the meantime, if you've got those questions, as Cameron mentioned, drop them into the Q&A. If you see others, be sure to upvote those. We're going to be answering those as we go, so that way you can have those. So let's go ahead and move to next slide. All right, so in a short version here of what is the TCGM program, quick refresher, we're going to review the intents and aims of the program. We're recording, and then the slides are also going to be available. So as we're going through this, I realize I'm going to be talking a bit faster because we've got a lot of information that's coming through. So next slide. TCGM is one of the largest investments that EPA has made to date to address climate change and advance environmental justice. The program itself is designed as a pass-through model, whereby EPA passes the funds through the grant makers to distribute and manage those smaller awards to community-based organizations more efficiently than the traditional federal grants process. So if you have experience in that, you'll know that oftentimes you submit something and then you will go months before you hear anything. And so this process is quite different from that in the sense that you'll be submitting and you'll hear information back, you'll receive information back about your application sooner rather than later. And that whole timeline is really reduced down from over 6 months to try and get under 6 months for this. And our goal is really, we want that whole piece to happen within 3 months. So as a whole, this program is designed to provide those federal funds to community-based organizations and other eligible organizations to support planning, assessment, and development of community-based projects. Next slide. So if you haven't had a chance to review that notice of funding opportunity, please do so. It is a rich resource of information there. Um, the um, the all this information that are on these slides here are also in that notice of funding opportunity. So to help us meet the program goals, the projects we're looking to fund under this program should directly benefit and empower communities to address those local issues. So as you're preparing, this is a key point that should be incorporated into your project descriptions, activities, and how you're going to be successful. So today we're really going to be focusing on how you can incorporate that into that project section. So when we're reviewing, when the reviewers and the community advisory boards are looking at your applications, they're making their reviews, they're making, the community advisory boards will be making the decision about your application. They're going to be looking at how well the project application responds to these project aims. And so those aims are threefold: addressing longstanding environmental and health challenges within historically underserved and disadvantaged communities, improving the health, equity, and resilience of underserved communities, and benefiting disadvantaged populations. So as you're going through, you want to make sure that those aims are incorporated into those project descriptions, into your activities, that you're really showing that how your project is going to do that. All right, next slide. Just highlighting real quick the primary aims of the program. Cameron, if we can go ahead into the next one. All right, so in designing this, we incorporated the three principles of reducing barriers to assist communities in developing and submitting successful applications. That's part of what this series is here, so that it is not intimidating, that you really feel you can take this on. You can totally do this. If you've never done a federal application before, this is why this program exists. It is incredibly, our focus in designing this is to make it very community-centered, meaning that community members are involved in making the decisions that affect their communities, serving as reviewers and serving as members of the community advisory board. So RTI, as the grant maker, is not actually making the decision about these applications. These are going to be made by community members. You might be part of that process if you're serving as a reviewer or serving on a community advisory board. We're still looking for individuals who are interested in that. We haven't established those yet, so there's still that opportunity. And in addition to that, our third piece here is providing that guidance and peer learning in the application process. So as serving in the process of serving as a reviewer, you're also able to see what other organizations are doing and how they're presenting that information, and being able to contribute to understanding how well their those applications are prepared, and that in turn can help you moving forward also as you prepare for either applying to this program or other programs. So the whole process is intended to make the application and the funding easier. So as you can see here, we've got our list is that all of the questions are most of them are going to be multiple choice or short answer. And meaning that the longest response that we have here is going to be 500 words. There's detailed descriptions of all of the questions in that notice of funding opportunity. It really is intended to serve as an application guide to take you through the whole process. So it's as you're going through, you can connect on those different questions and be like, oh, what are they looking for? What are they looking at? So that you can see those pieces. You can save and return you can return to your application at any time. So that way you can make any additions or revisions. We know that this is the whole process for this application is going to take some time. You're not going to be able to do it in one sitting, and that's okay. What we want to do is we want to, make this easy for you to do it at the time that's convenient for you, and then be able to come back to it. You can also add multiple contributors to your application as well, so you don't have to be the only one that's going in there and working on that application. Many hands make light work, and so you can invite others to support and participate in that application preparation. And of course, just highlighting communication so that you can receive those email notifications and updates and kind of address how much traffic you get into your inbox from the system. So right now we've pretty much just got there's 4 different levels that you can choose on those so that you'll get those. Next slide. All right. Yay. So now I get to hand things over. I'm handing them over to Katie Ordell with the React for EJ, and she's actually going to take you through this next section here on preparing your application and developing your project. So Katie, are you ready?
I am ready. Thank you so much, Christine.
Awesome. Yay.
All right, let's jump right into it. Excuse me. I'm sorry, I'm getting over a cold, so bear with me. Okay, so the project information section is really the heart of your application. So we have screenshots here of the actual application process. So hopefully this will look familiar once you actually go in to enter all your information. All right, so here you'll detail the award tier you're seeking, your project's title, duration, and start date, as well as key partners and their roles, and also your community's needs and how your project addresses them. You'll also include information on the expected outcomes and measurable activities. And the light purple outlines that you see here around the bullets, those are the sections we're really going to focus on today. Next slide, please, Cameron. Perfect. So the NOFO outlines different funding tiers, as we've mentioned, and they're each tailored to projects of varying sizes and scopes. Selecting the right tier is crucial for aligning your application with the program's requirements. So be sure to really follow that eligibility criteria for each tier in the NOFO. And next, we're going to take a bit of a deeper dive into that. So we'll talk about that in more detail if you all are a little confused at the moment. So let's talk about which one might fit your project best. Next slide, Cameron. Okay, so there's a lot on this slide. We're going to walk through it slowly because there's some really good information here. So yeah, there's, we're going to talk about the specific award types and project examples that are outlined in the NOFO. So understanding these can really help you determine where your project fits the best. So the TCGM program consists of 4 opportunities, and they're all presented here. You can see the sort of like the columns on the slide. So your organization should choose which opportunity best fits with your project. So kind of going across from left to right, let's talk through some examples. So foundational support, this could include activities like building organizational expertise and grant management. Moving to the next column, these are assessment projects. This is tier 1. Some examples of this might include conducting community surveys to identify environmental challenges or conducting air quality monitoring and reporting. Tier 2, these are going to be your planning projects. So things like training community members in sustainable practices or developing partnerships to increase resource sharing opportunities or creating action plans to address local priorities. Now, tier 3, these are your larger development projects. Examples here could include installing solar panels in underserved areas, maybe building a resilience hub to meet some of the basic needs of the vulnerable community members during an extreme weather event, or something like creating a community garden to address food insecurity. There's nothing that prevents you from applying to all 4 of these. However, if you submit for the same project, you will be asked to prioritize, and your application might not be or may not be considered under the non-competitive category. So just something to keep in mind. And a reminder that if you are applying for a non-competitive, your organizations should focus on that application first. And there's a webinar recording that describes the non-competitive funding that is available on the TCGM website. All right. So I encourage you all to refer back to this slide later. It has some really good examples. Next, let's go through kind of like a decision tree that you can this hopefully will help you think through which tier your project might apply to. So when deciding which tier to apply for, it's important to assess the scale, scope, and readiness of your project. So hopefully this will help you sort of break it down. So starting at the top, sort of a basic question, do you have staff to assist with implementing an award? If you don't, and this is something that's very new to you, then you might want to look at the non-competitive category. Maybe you do. So let's move on to the next one. Do you have data that demonstrates the issue in your community? Environmental data, socio-demographic data, information that really helps inform what the challenge is and what your potential solutions are. If you don't, then you might be looking at tier 1, so sort of assessing the situation. If you do have some data, you might move on to tier 2. And the question to ask yourself there is, do you have plans for how you want to fix the issue? If you don't have a real concrete plan, then tier 2 might be appropriate. If you do have a plan, then you're going to move on to tier 3, and this might be the appropriate category for your project. If you're ready to put your plan into action, shovels in the ground, building things, implementing things. So hopefully that's a nice little framework to help you figure out where your project might fit in. Next slide, please. Okay, so a quick note about project partners. While partnerships are not required, they can enhance your project's impact. So when identifying potential partners, you want to look for organizations that complement your expertise, so that your organization's goals and missions and roles kind of dovetail nicely with each other. You also want to make sure to clearly define each partner's role in the project in your application. Make sure to provide their full name of the organization and do not use acronyms unless that's part of their legal name. A letter of support is optional and not required to show partnership. And a last note is that formal agreements are not mandatory, but they can help to clarify responsibilities. Okay, next slide. All right, so this is kind of the open-ended, important part of your application. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking here about how you describe your project objective. So when you're describing your project objective, it's a good idea to focus on the specific goals that you aim to achieve and describe how they address the needs of your community. So a strong objective is going to be something that's clear, it's actionable, and it's measurable. So some things to consider when you're writing your project objective. The first is just defining the problem, or the challenge or the issue. So begin by identifying sort of the primary environmental or health challenges in your community and use data or community input to emphasize the urgency of addressing these challenges. Um, the more sort of examples and data you can use to describe, the better. Next, you want to state your objective clearly. So it should answer the question, what is your project going to accomplish? An example might be something like improve water quality in underserved neighborhoods by installing 10 rain gardens over the next 12 months. So that's pretty like actionable, specific, talks about which problem you're solving and how you're going to do it. You also want to link your objective to outcomes. So you might want to explain how achieving this objective will create meaningful change in your community. Um, and then, think about the TCGM program objectives that Christine talked about. The more you can align your project with those objectives and describe that here, the better. So think about advancing equity, resilience, and health. And also just keep in mind that the outcomes and the project objectives for each of the tiers will likely look very different. There's lots of opportunity for different types of projects. And we want to encourage creativity and for you to really think through what's going to be the best thing for your community. So keep in mind that this objective is really the foundation for the rest of your application. So everything else that you put in your application, you want to support your objective. And a clear and well-defined objective makes it easier to outline your activities, your expected outcomes, and an eventual evaluation plan. Okay, next slide. All right, so next, you're going to be asked to describe your project community and the issues that it's facing. So it's really essential to paint sort of a vivid picture of the people and the challenges that your project aims to address. Keep in mind you get 500 words here. So that's about 1 page single spaced or 2 pages double spaced. So kind of keep that in your head as you're thinking about this. One other thing to note about this box right here is that you do not need to include anything about community geography or size. That's going to be in a later part of the application. So let's talk about a few tips for this. We're going to do that on the next slide, Cameron. Thank you. Okay, so some tips for describing your community, some questions to kind of ask yourself. The first thing you want to try and think about is how you define your community. Who lives here? What makes them unique? You could mention demographics, cultural identity, specific economic conditions, how your community has come together in the past, sort of the historical context of your community. You also want to highlight the environmental or health issues present in your community. So be specific about those challenges. Are they struggling with poor air quality, lack of clean water, or frequent flooding? You also want to think about what the CAB might want to know. That's the Community Advisory Board. And then think about community input and how much that matters. So how did the community identify these issues, potentially mention surveys, focus groups, or community meetings that shaped your understanding of their needs? And then lastly, think about explaining the impact. So showing how the issue affects the daily lives of community members, and highlight why addressing this issue aligns with the program goals, as we've talked about. So the one other thing to remember here is that this is the opportunity to demonstrate why your project is essential and how it will bring positive change to the community. I'm going to pause for 1 second and just see if we have any. I know I've gone through a lot of information so far. Do we have any questions that are kind of urgent to answer right now?
There's one that I don't know if I would necessarily pose it as urgent, but I think it's relevant.
Yeah, let's do it.
Also, hi everyone, my name's Skylar. Um, I think Sandra's question is a really good one. We want to highlight empowerment to handle long-standing issues, but funding is vital for an emergency cleanup situation. Can we primarily use funding for the emergency situation? I think here I'm hearing some tension between long-standing issues and more acute environmental issues and how to both reflect that in the community background and discuss that there, but then making sure that funding is applied to that acute issue. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a really good question. And I'll answer it, but I'm going to let Christine and my other colleagues weigh in if they have anything additional to add. I think all of the above applies. So, we talked about, there are the different tiers and different sort of levels of funding. I would say one of the pieces of advice that we're going to give is it's better to do one thing and do it well than to try and do too many things in one application. So I would pick whichever thing feels like the priority for your community and the thing that you can describe the best in the framework of the goals of the TCGM program. I don't know if Christine, you have anything to add to that.
I'll just add the funding for this, even though we're trying to turn this around much faster than the typical federal process for funding and awards for that, it's still the timeline for this is it's still gonna take you probably between 3 to 6 months to get that funding. So if you have those immediate acute needs, we want to refer you also to those immediate disaster resources that are available through FEMA and Homeland Security and other agencies that are going to be able to provide more of those rapid relief funding that's needed. So for this, it can be certainly focused towards preparedness and resilience as through the recovery process, but certainly for the more emergency situations, this is not going to provide that rapid funding. It's quick. It's just not that quick, unfortunately.
Good question. Any other ones we should pause for right now? Or should we keep going?
One other one just came in that I think is very relevant to this slide. And that is the community description section also in the foundational level or just in the competitive tiers? And I think that's kind of the thrust of the question, so I'll leave it there, but there's some kind of additional context that I can provide if that would be useful. Let me know if you want more context or if that was enough.
I think that's enough context. I'm actually not 100% sure on the answer though.
Yeah, so I can
Yeah.
provide that. So the community description piece, the piece that Katie is going over here around the issues and the CAB and the assets, that piece, that question is only in the competitive. This goes to the making the non-competitive questions much shorter and more condensed. So the piece around the community background, around your relationship with the community, and the connections that you've had in those are going to be tied in with the organization description about tell us about your organization. So it's going to be a little bit more of an abbreviated section in there to that for that work, but you can also speak a little bit to that in some of the other sections also. But there's 14 questions in this project section for the competitives, and then there's seven questions. So it's much more reduced, and there's slightly different questions for the non-competitive. So today, that's what Katie's going through for the competitive awards. And Laura's posted the website for the direct link to that non-competitive webinar recording. So that can take you through those questions as well. So, yep.
Thanks, Christine. Want to acknowledge that there's definitely a lot of other great questions in the Q&A that I see so far. Please keep adding those. I think I'm seeing a lot of questions that are more specific, and so I'm going to hold those until the Q&A section. So back to you, Kate.
Great. Okay. We'll try to go through these efficiently so we have lots of time for Q&A at the end. All right, so the next question for describing impacted communities is defining sort of how the community might be underserved or disadvantaged. So as a reminder, the TCGM program is designed to fund projects for underserved and disadvantaged communities that have long faced disproportionate environmental hazards and health risks. So for this section of the application, you will be asked whether your project will benefit one or more disadvantaged communities. The application and the NOFO provide two different government mapping tools to help complete this section. So in the TCGM application, the Climate and Environmental Justice Screening Tool, or CJEST, I think some people refer to that as CJEST, is linked to support that section. And I think we're going to drop links to some of these resources in the chat. They're also on the slide there, so when you receive the slides later, you'll have those. In the NOFO, the Inflation Reduction Act Disadvantaged Community Map is also linked to support that section. So there's kind of two visuals there to hopefully, when you see those later, they'll look familiar. EJ Screen is an additional tool compared to the two resources that are shown here that has more granular data output. So you could also use that to inform this part of the application. Next slide. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is identify the following topic areas or activities that are going to be addressed by your project. So as we kind of just talked about in answering that question, you want to think about what the priorities are for your community. Like we said, it's better to include just one kind of focused thing in your application and really be able to articulate that well than to try and do too many things. Also, make sure that the activities that you're proposing are feasible for the timelines that we've been talking about. So there's a list here, and then you can also, if you feel like your project doesn't fit into any of these categories, there is a box at the bottom where you can select other and then include some more information on your project. Okay, next slide. Okay, so a little bit more about describing your community. You're also going to be asked to provide a brief summary about the geographic areas that will benefit from the project. Your response is going to be limited to 250 words. And it might even consist of a bulleted list of relevant information. So make sure to include things like zip codes, that's preferable, the county, the community, or neighborhood information. The more specific you can be, the better. Just so that the folks reviewing your application can really get a sense of where this project is going to impact folks. Okay, next slide. You're also going to be asked to provide information about how many people are going to directly benefit from the project. And there are many ways to get to that number. There's no like set formula for how to figure that out. So that's why there's the box below where you'll just describe how you came up with those estimates. And this is really intended to reflect the size of the impact of your proposed project by measuring the number of people. So try to be as specific as possible and just describe how you got to your answer. Next slide. Okay, so in this section, you're going to provide an overview of your proposed key activities and some examples that will benefit from the project. So that includes relevant details like zip codes and community information. And keep in mind that the response is going to be between 100 and 500 words, which is typically 1 to 3 paragraphs. So some tips to think about as you are describing key activities. Try to make them measurable and achievable within the project's timeline. Align them with the funding tier's requirements. And then again, focus, I know we keep saying this, but it's important. Focus on fewer activities and execute them well rather than overcommitting. So that's kind of the activities. Now pivoting to thinking about outcomes. Those are really a change that's going to result due to the activity or the intervention. So these might include shifts in behavior, attitude, systems, improvements in human health, environmental conditions. It's kind of like what the end goal is. That's the outcome. So I know that's kind of vague, so let's go through a couple of examples that will hopefully help to make this more clear. Next slide, please. Oops, yeah, next slide. Sorry, there we go. So we have some examples of key activities and outcomes for each of the 3 tiers. And we're going to go through a potential water quality project for each of those. So this slide's meant to show examples of different project descriptions based on the funding tier for competitive funding. Keep that in mind. These are just examples. TCGM wants to encourage creativity and innovation in projects and key activities. So yours do not have to look like this. We're going to walk through the example for tier 2, but all of the information is here on the slide, so you can refer back to it. So as a reminder, tier 2 is focused on planning. The issue for this tier 2 project is noted in the dark purple column. This is water quality. So a possible objective for this tier 2 project could be developing a plan for improving clean water infrastructure. Key activities might be reviewing results from a study on clean drinking water sources. It could be gathering community input on the results to decide how to increase access to clean water, and then determining a timeline for those improvements. So for example, for installing water fountains in schools and neighborhood parks, or replacing contaminated wells. An outcome could be a work plan for how the community wants to improve water infrastructure. So you can see in the rows for tiers 1 and 3 that the project and objectives for water quality there are different than tier 2. Those ones are about assessing the current water quality and gathering information via well texting and an environmental scan of clean water sources. Note that for the non-competitive funds, the activities and outcomes will be very different. So for example, for a non-competitive award, you might be hiring staff or a consultant to do a strategic plan as a key activity to build capacity. So success or the outcome might be your organization is more prepared to take on bigger projects. We're running a little bit short on time, so I might sort of breeze over the next slide. We have some more examples here. These are, we kind of put them together for an outdoor air quality project for each of the 3 tiers. So I'll let you all refer back to these if you want some more examples. I just want to make sure we have enough time to get to the Q&A. So let's move on to the next slide. Planning for success. So the other part, another question you'll have to answer in your application is about how your organization is going to plan for the timely and successful achievement of the objectives in your project. And this is really the foundation of success for your project. So to clearly communicate how you've set your project up for success, you might want to consider discussing things like your timeline, maybe outlining some milestones and deadlines for the different stages of your project, making sure that that timeline is realistic and accounts for potential delays, things like hiring subcontractors, reporting, community engagement, make sure those are all part of your timeline if they're important parts of your project. You might want to talk about your stakeholder engagement process. So working with community members, partners, and other stakeholders to ensure that the project aligns with their needs, hosting meetings or focus groups to gather input and build support. You might also want to talk in this section about how you're going to manage your resources, which could include subcontractors. So you might want to review your budget and confirm that the funding is sufficient for each activity, and then make sure that you have roles and responsibilities assigned to your team and your partners clearly. And then also talk about how you're prepared for reporting and measuring progress throughout your project. So if you have a system for tracking progress and gathering data, you might want to describe that here. And that will make final reporting smoother and ensure more accountability. So, you know, kind of by focusing on some of those planning elements, you'll demonstrate that your organization's capacity, you'll better demonstrate your organization's capacity to deliver impactful outcomes. Next slide. Quick note on quality assurance. QAPs are not required for the TCGM program, but if you are awarded, it will be determined if you need a QAP. So once awarded, you should consider creating a QAP if you'll collect data, environmental data, or you want other people to use your data. And there's some more information on this in the NOFO, so I'm going to refer you all to that and move on to the next slide. Okay, so just a couple of like wrap up big picture overall tips to think about while you're working on your applications. We've touched on some of these, but be specific and whenever possible, use examples. Answer all the questions in the application clearly and as concisely as you can. I know that's not always easy. You have limited space in your application, so try to avoid repeating information across sections. If you've said it once, leave it there and you can use the section for other information. We've talked about doing one thing well instead of everything not well. And then think about your application as a whole and develop project activities that make sense together. So if you are proposing, a couple of different things, make sure that it's clear how they're related and how they tie back to those TCGM program goals. Let's see, and then next slide. Just a couple more tips. It's good to make sure that your community's voice comes through in your application. So show how they've been involved in the development of project ideas and how they're going to continue to be involved. Have someone you trust review your application. It always helps to have a second set of eyes looking at things. And then lastly, make sure to leverage the technical assistance resources that we have available for you all. And I think with that, I'm going to turn things over to Skylar. Thank you for listening, everyone.
Thanks so much, Katie. Just want to jump in here with the slide to talk a little bit more about that last bullet in the tip section and elaborate on what it can look like for like what the technical assistance resources in Region 4 can look like. And the next slide is great. Thank you for jumping back for a second. So React for EJ is the Technical Assistance Center for Region 4, and we're offering a range of services that apply to just TCGM. We also support other funding opportunities, but for today, I'll just talk briefly about how we're helping people with TCGM funding opportunities. We have office hours, webinars, work sessions, and SAM.gov office hours. As you can see here, they're kind of the four main columns. Office hours are once a week and they're hosted via Zoom, and you can get answers in real time and hear answers in real time to questions. The next office hour is Tuesday, January 22nd. The webinars, what we're doing here today is a webinar, and we plan to do that for the 4 different topics within the application. Pre-registration is required, and we will be recording all of these sessions and then posting them as we've kind of discussed in the chat a little bit also. The weekly work sessions will be every Thursday from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern time. And these will be group-based with breakout sessions, and they'll focus on specific sections of the application. I think those will be really helpful for people, hopefully. And then this last column is the SAM.gov office hours that is hosted by the Environmental Protection Network, which is one of our amazing regional partners. And they host office hours every 2 weeks on Wednesdays from 2 to 3 p.m. And you can register for those on their website. And you can see the links to register are on this slide, so feel free to register. We'd love to see you at other events. The final note I'd make there, if any of these, if it's difficult to attend any of these events due to technology issues or timelines, please do let us know. We would love to have that feedback. And you can give it via like our website. We have a contact us page where there's a form, and then you can also call us at our 1-800 number on our website. So please do reach out. All right, next slide, please. So we are going to take some time to now get to the remaining questions. I know, Christine, it looks like you've offered to answer a few of them live, which is great. I think I'll just pass it off to you to get started on some of the questions in the Q&A.
All right, so I flagged a few of these to just answer live, so I'll just start at the top with Shannon, for what you answer, your question that you raised around this is your first time applying for a federal grant. Yay! If we were awarded, what are we required to turn in as the project progresses? So one, in addition to quarterly progress reports, which are going to be, be provided a template to report your activities. We're also going to, as an awardee, you will receive, be assigned a grants coordinator to help you with all of the business pieces and the invoicing and the billing components there, as well as a project officer. So we're mirroring what the federal grant process is going to be, where we have that oversight, but it's a little bit more of a coaching approach with that instead. So with that, they'll, as part of the kickoff, we'll go through what is required for progress reporting, as well as monthly check-ins with your project officer. So hopefully we'll be able to make an award to your project. So, but make sure you submit it. All right. Next question is around the cost matching. And not sure if it's in the NOFO. Yep, it is. It's in a box at the bottom of a page. But can you tell me if there's any type of match required? And the answer to that is no. There's no cost matching required for this opportunity. So it is what you're budgeting, what you're requesting, and you do not need a matching for that. So, all right, as I'm going through these quickly. All right, Willa, your question of, is there a section to include community letters of support beyond organizational partners as supplemental material? One, we love letters of support. Those are very welcomed. It does help to demonstrate that there is that relationship and connection working with your community. That said, they're not required. So if you do have that letter, and it can be addressed to our program director, Daniela Pineda at RTI International, and we're actually putting that into the FAQ so that that information is there. If you're working on the letter right now, you can send an email to info@thrivingenvironments.org to receive that contact information. But to submit that letter, once you receive it, that can be actually uploaded in the budget section. So that's where you have the ability to upload files. You're going to upload your line item budget and then your budget narrative. And you can also attach the letters of support to go with that as well. So you can, that's where you can add any additional supplemental materials as well. But there isn't a dedicated section to that. But I'm writing that down as a possible amendment for the future. So, all right, thanks for that question. All right, let's see. Okay. All right, Larry. I'm located in Florida, and was looking into submitting a Tier 3 application addressing emergency preparedness and disaster resiliency in hardening residential properties to be able to withstand the effects of hurricanes, tropical storms that plague the state. The whole city falls under a disadvantaged community through the screening tool, and I wanted to know if that was an allowable project to apply for funding. Larry, yes, I'm actually based out of Central Florida, so I completely recognize this. And emergency preparedness and disaster resiliency is part of this. It may fall under a Tier 3 in terms of development and being able to carry out some of those activities. If there's construction around hardening, and construction is very broad. That includes also if you're renovating or excavating or demolishing. And for those, you will be subject to all of those cross-cutting regulations for construction. But if you are looking at um, carrying out that plan in terms of working with your community to be able to put those plans into place. And it may not involve construction because again, the projects are limited to 350,000 and only a portion of that, a percentage of that can go towards construction. And at the moment, I don't have what that limit is, but that does then kind of create that upper limit to what you can do in terms of actual construction activities. But to your general project of addressing emergency preparedness and disaster resiliency, yes, that does fit within this program, and certainly within the communities that are going to be benefiting from the proposed work. So thanks for that question, Larry. All right. How are we on time?
We have about 3 more minutes for Q&A.
Okay.
And we
Good.
have about 3 open in the chat right now. I
Ooh,
think, go ahead if you have one that you
let's,
want to answer.
I want to throw this, I want to throw Stephanie's question about, do organizations pay for technical assistance, or are you working under your own grant? So for all of this great, the resources that you highlighted, Skylar, there, do you want to answer that one, or do we want to?
Love to. Yeah, happy to. I was hoping that this would we would answer this with time. Yeah, we are working under our own grant, so we offer technical assistance at no cost to organizations, and really proud that we are able to do that. So great question. Thank you.
All right. And I'm going to knock out Anita's question there about, can you apply for a tier 2 or a tier 3 if you haven't done an assessment in tier 1? And the answer is yes. These are not progressive. There isn't any stepwise requirements for these programs. So if your project activities fit under a tier 2 or they fit under a tier 3 in terms of whether you are planning or whether you are carrying out the work, then yes, those certainly would apply under the tier 2 and tier 3. So nope, you don't need to do a tier 1. So yep, thanks, Anita. That's a good question.
One that
Um,
got an upvote is from Megan, that I think is a good question. Is a financial audit likely if we are awarded one of the competitive tiered grants?
So we're going to be making hundreds of awards under this whole program. So the likelihood of a financial audit is something we really can't speak to sort of what's that probability. But what we are doing is making sure that as an awardee, that you have the infrastructure to be in place and that you are accounting, so that if there is a financial audit, either from the RTI as the grant maker or from EPA as part of that, then you'll be able to comply with that and be able to address that. So I think you need to be prepared for an audit at any time. So preparedness is the best course of action there. So, yep. Let's see. So to the percentage of funding for construction, I've got to look that up. It's not 50. I don't want to say that it is 50%. I've got to check that and be able to confirm that. So if that is a question that you have specifically, please let me know. It's yes, Larry, it's not listed in the NOFO. So you're correct there. But we'll be following up and adding that in there.
I think there's just one last question that I think we have time for from Gary.
Yeah, so Jerry, on the awardees
Gary.
subject to the same legal requirements as direct federal awardees. So um, all those different the FARs and other requirements that are associated with federal funding do flow through. So a lot of those are going to apply. There are different specific requirements that will also be spelled out in the terms and conditions of your agreement. And we right now are working with EPA to make sure that those are clearly set forth and outlined in detail there. So yes, I would, as a line of moving forward, is to assume that this is federal funding and so therefore subject to the same legal requirements. Mhm. Yep. Woo, you guys are
Thank you.
good. These are great questions. We always get such good questions. I've seen hundreds of them come through with all these sessions. And you always great questions. So thank you all for asking those.
Yeah, I think thank you, Christine, for answering as well. I think we can go ahead and jump to the next slide and start the wrap up section of the webinar.
All right. Well, yes, we are. Thank you all for joining today's webinar. We are wrapping this up. As you mentioned, the slides and links and recordings are going to be available online through our website and the YouTube channel for those pieces there. Hopefully, you'll be able to join us next week for our last webinar, which is the Developing Your Proposal Budget. That's going to be, we actually have that twice, Wednesday and Thursday, with an evening session for folks who are interested and available for that. So come bring your budget questions for those. If you have specific budget questions, you can actually register through the React for EJ for those the upcoming work sessions and office hours. And those are great times to get answers for questions as well. So if you don't want to wait till next week, you can also pop into those sessions this week. Again, register so you can get your Zoom link for those. And please take a moment to complete our quick feedback poll that popped up on your screen there. That's really helpful for us as we move forward. And to the question about, is the money in the coffers given the change in administration? And the answer is yes. So those funds have been obligated. So that is probably some of the best news that we have. So it would take a whole lot of effort to get those out of those accounts. So great. And yes, we do have a number for assistance. So if you have any tech questions, let's go ahead and go to the last slide, which has all of our contact information there. So you can register to receive updates here. And then next slide has all of those socials and emails. So there's that YouTube link there as well. I was hoping it had the phone number, but the phone number is on our website also. So you can give us a call or through React for EJ as well. And submit your applications. First window closes January 31st. So that would be a great time. And if you don't make that window, April will be the next time on that one. So thank you all. Thank you, Skylar. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Janelle. Thank you, Laura, for answering these questions. And thank you all for attending another really great session. It's wonderful. And we are excited to see all of the applications that are coming in. All right. Have a great rest of your week. And we'll see you soon.